Hare Krishna. Prabhu, normally this question is for parents and fathers. What we do normally, we spend lakhs and lakhs of rupees for their education of our children. And we try to find out the best material schools for them. Is this right and sufficient?
You're saying we spend less money
Lakhs and lakhs of money we spend for their education.
and try to find the best schools.
So is that right?
Okay.
Or is it sufficient for us?
Okay. So as devotee parents, if we want to educate our children and we try to spend the least possible money and try to give them the best possible education, is that good? See, firstly, it's not necessary that the education that involves a maximum expenditure is necessarily going to the best quality education. So the parents' responsibility is to educate the children, and whatever is required for that, we should do that. And we shouldn't equate simplistically that less expensive education is necessarily less quality education. But as far as the practice of bhakti is concerned, we sometimes have a simplistic separation. This is material, this is spiritual. And this material I should do as less as possible. It's just entangling. And this is spiritual, and I should do this as much as possible. Now, this is actually a very surface level understanding of bhakti. Yes, we should separate between the material and spiritual so that we give enough time for the spiritual directly. That means we come to the temple, we chant the holy names, we worship the deities. So for that, we should make time. In that sense, we can separate or mark the material and the spiritual. But once we have cultivated through the spiritual activity, the mood of service to Krishna, that mood of service to Krishna should permeate our entire life. And then while doing every activity, it's not that we should be thinking, is this material, is this spiritual? No, for example, if in a class, say we are hearing a class and the speaker makes some joke, and then we start, instead of laughing, we start thinking, am I laughing for Krishna's pleasure or for my sense gratification? And there's no need to go into paralysis by analysis like that. Now just, it's a part of Krishna Katha, we can laugh. So there is no need to constantly be analyzing material, spiritual at that time. Our focus should be not what is material, what is spiritual. Our focus should be, how can I serve in this situation? How can I serve? So our children, we should see them as Prabhupada told them, the Vaikuntha children, Krishna has entrusted them to us. And therefore, we should do what it takes to offer them the best education. And as far as economizing is concerned, yes, it's always good not to be extravagant in terms of spending money. But we should try our best to give them the quality education that will help them to become wonderful human beings, to become wonderful devotees in future. And thus, they succeed in the mission of life and we also succeed. So we shouldn't separate that because this is material, I should not spend too much money on this. No, our mood should be, how can I serve? Prabhupada writes in the 7th chapter purport that the jurisdiction of Krishna consciousness extends everywhere. So even in our family life, in our relationship with our spouses, with our children, with our parents, there also we think, how best can I serve Krishna? And act accordingly. So give the best possible education within our circumstances. And that's, we should see that not as a material duty. It may be a material duty, but because we are trying to serve Krishna, it is also a part of our devotional service. Does it answer your question? Thank you. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Recently, Trupti Desai entered in Shani temple. Should women go to visit such temples? I mean, should be they allowed? Or what scriptures say about it?
Okay. So recently, some women entered the Shani temple. So should women be allowed to enter Shani temple? What does scripture say about this? There are two different forces at work in any tradition. One is fidelity and the other is flexibility. Fidelity means faithfulness. So fidelity is what connects a tradition with its past. Fidelity is what connects the tradition with the past. And flexibility is what enables the tradition to connect with its current situation. So every tradition, so we may think of a tradition, it's not like a frozen thing that just continues generation after generation after generation. No, the tradition has a central core that is unchanging, and it has a periphery that is inevitably changing. Even in the Gaudiya tradition, if we see the way Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu practiced Bhakti Yoga and the way Bhaktivinoda Thakur taught Bhakti Yoga, that's different. And we look at the way Bhaktivinoda Thakur taught Bhakti Yoga and the way Srila Prabhupada practiced Bhakti Yoga, that's different. So the difference is not in the essence, but the difference is in the circumstance and the way that essence is accessed and presented in the circumstance. So this principle that there is fidelity and flexibility, both of these need to be intelligently balanced. If one focuses too much on fidelity and there is no flexibility, then the tradition becomes a museum. The tradition in a museum, things are there, they are preserved, but they are of no practical use to anyone. So if one has only fidelity and no flexibility, the tradition becomes a part, something like a museum. It is just there as of no practical use to anyone. On the other hand, if there is only flexibility and there is no fidelity, then the tradition becomes simply an extension of the current world. It has no connection with the source from which it has come. So there has to be fidelity and flexibility both in balance. And this balance of fidelity and flexibility often comes to a flashpoint when it comes with the issues of women. So what role women should play, or what all facilities women should have or should not have. In today's world, this often becomes a heavy flashpoint. Now there is, in different traditions, means even if you look at the Vedic tradition, there are different temples, there are different understandings of how to practice spirituality, how to access God, and through simplistically claim that women not being allowed into a particular temple is discrimination, or to claim that because women are allowed now, this is a victory for women. This is a superimposition of today's values on traditional values. And this sort of superimposition is not necessarily a sign of growth or progress, because the tradition may have certain understandings. We have to look in the tradition to see whether necessarily this was because of discrimination. There may be certain esoteric understandings, or there may be certain cultural aspects. So for example, now even in our temples, we may not allow on the altar everyone to go. One has to become initiated. One has to not only be initiated, Brahman initiated, one has to be in a clean state, having bathed, and then one can enter the altar. That is simply to preserve the sanctity of the altar. If someone starts saying, this is discrimination, this is discrimination, no, that is not discrimination. That is simply necessary to preserve the sanctity of whatever circumstances there. So now, if, for example, if we go by airplane, at that time when we go by airplane, there is security clearance. Now when there is security clearance, if we are wearing a jacket, an overcoat, or wearing some headscarf, they tell us you have to remove it. Now we may say, if somebody's part of the tradition is there that you wear a headscarf, I cannot remove it. So you will not be allowed to go inside. Now that is a security necessity over there, and one has to understand that this is not discrimination. So we look at so many other situations in today's world where, for the sake of security, we have where people follow certain protocols, and it's not necessary that those protocols are discriminatory. So the point is that rather than simplistically claiming that this is right or this is wrong, every current representative of the tradition, has to intelligently choose the right balance between fidelity and flexibility. So if in certain temples, if there are certain traditions, so for example, in some temples it may well be that the deity is considered to be a brahmachari. And then in those temples, so women may not be allowed. There are some temples in South India where men are not allowed. The temples only for women. Now, is it that men are trying to break down the temples or those temples' doors and go in and they say, now we have got our rights? No, there is. See, one problem in material world is we take one value and we some tend to make that value as a supreme value. And then, so for example, the value that says women should be equal to men, women should have all the same rights that men have. We take that value and we assume that anything that is opposed to this value is discriminatory. But it is not necessarily like that. There may be other circumstances over there which need to be taken into consideration. So, regarding if specific temples have specific traditions, then we have to look behind the traditions and see whether those traditions come simply from some dogma or they come from some scripture, and whether they have particular understanding which needs to be educated about. So rather than just calling the temple discriminatory, we have to look at the individual temples or individual situations and accordingly recognize how actions are to be done. So Srila Prabhupada within the Krishna consciousness movement he took the mood of bhakti and he was very inclusive. He said that essentially everyone is welcome to practice bhakti. So for example, in the Jagannath temple, even today non-Indians are not allowed. But Prabhupada said that he was Jagannath. Why are you making him Bharatnath? He's the Lord of the universe. Why are you restricting him? So Srila Prabhupada in general was very inclusive and accommodating. And that is the spirit of bhakti. Everybody should be encouraged in the practice of bhakti. And the specific extent of the encouragement and the form that the encouragement may take, that may vary based on a specific tradition and its history and its current expression. But broadly, there has to be flexibility in the tradition and there has to be fidelity. And rather than saying that the fidelity itself is discrimination or the flexibility alone is victory, we have to understand the situation properly and then accordingly take well-informed decisions. So I won't comment specifically on the temple because each temple may have its own traditions. But broadly speaking, nobody should be discriminated against in the broad principles of practicing, in the broad principles and practices of bhakti. At the same time, without being sensitive to the nuances of each tradition or each temple, one should not try to wholesale impose one set of values on everything. Does it answer your question? Thank you.